The helicopter went down at 03:47 hours. No one saw it happen. No one was supposed to. That was the nature of Admiral Marcus Thorne's work. Invisible, deniable, conducted in the kind of darkness that didn't appear on any official flight manifest. The Black Hawk had been carrying him from a classified briefing site in the Virginia mountains back to Naval Station Norfolk when the engine made a sound like a man swallowing broken glass, and then the world became a spinning, shrieking thing that ended in a hillside and fire. The rescue team found him 4 hours later. By then, he had already done something extraordinary. He had put himself to sleep. The attending physician at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Dr. Patricia Okafor, had seen a lot in 22 years of trauma medicine. She had treated soldiers with injuries that defied survival. She had watched men hold themselves together through sheer stubbornness until they could say goodbye to their families. She had learned not to be surprised. Marcus Thorne surprised her. His vitals are stable, she told the assembled team during morning rounds, keeping her voice professionally flat. But we cannot explain his neurological state. He is not in a medically induced coma. We did not sedate him. His brain activity is, she paused, searching for the right word. Deliberate. Deliberate, repeated the neurology resident, Dr. Femi Adisa, who was young enough that his skepticism still showed on his face. That's the word I'm using? Dr. Okafor pulled up the scan on the wall display. The colors bloomed across the image like a controlled burn. He has significant internal injuries. 3 fractured ribs, a punctured lung that we've addressed, a hairline fracture of the L3 vertebra, and what appears to be a moderate traumatic brain injury from the impact. By every measure, he should be in agony. Instead, his body has done something I've only read about in literature, from advanced CRHAI training documentation. She looked around the room. He's suppressing his own pain response, voluntarily. And he's conserving energy by minimizing his conscious brain activity. That's not possible, Femi said. And yet, said Dr. Okafor. She let the silence hold. The scan glowed on the wall behind her, its strange topography of color telling a story none of them had the vocabulary to read. The thalamus was quiet where it should have been screaming. The prefrontal cortex showed a low, rhythmic pulse that looked less like unconsciousness and more like meditation, like a man who had walked into a room inside his own mind and locked the door behind him. So what do we do? Femi asked. We treat the injuries we understand. We monitor the ones we don't. And we wait. For what? Dr. Okafor turned off the display. The room dimmed. For him to decide to come back. The room they gave him was at the end of the corridor, away from the noise of the ward, standard protocol for high-ranking patients, and doubly so for patients whose presence at Walter Reed was, officially, not confirmed by any branch of the Department of Defense. 2 men in civilian clothes stood outside his door. They had the particular stillness of people trained to watch everything while appearing to watch nothing. The nursing staff had been briefed. Minimum contact. No personal questions. No photography. No discussion of the patient's identity outside of secure channels. His chart listed him as John Mercer. His wristband said the same. Nobody believed it. Everybody pretended to. Inside the room, the monitors kept their steady rhythm. The ventilator breathed for him in slow, mechanical sighs. And on the bedside table, placed there by one of the civilian men who had carried it from the wreckage in a plastic evidence bag, sat a single object that nobody on the medical team could explain. A child's wooden chess piece. A knight, small enough to close a fist around. It was burned along one edge. Someone had carved initials into its base, but the fire had taken them. The man in the bed did not move. The monitors did not change. The night stood watch. Ellie Vasquez had been at Walter Reed for 11 weeks. She had come from a community hospital in Albuquerque, drawn by a combination of loan forgiveness incentives and the particular stubbornness that had gotten her through nursing school as a single mother of a 7-year-old boy named Tomas. She was 31 years old. She had never worked with military patients before. She found the culture simultaneously impressive and baffling. The formality, the hierarchy, the way men with catastrophic injuries would apologize for being inconvenient. She had been assigned to the restricted corridor by accident, or so she was told. The regular nurse, a veteran named Charlene, had called out sick. Ellie had been the one available. Room 14. His meds were on the chart. Don't engage him in conversation. He won't respond anyway. She had nodded and gone to do her job. The two men outside the door looked at her badge for a long time. One of them made a phone call. She stood in the corridor holding a blood pressure cuff and a fresh IV bag, and waited with the patience of a woman who had once spent 9 hours in a Medicaid office with a screaming toddler on her hip. Eventually the door opened. The room smelled like antiseptic and something underneath it, something mineral and warm, like the air after a lightning strike. The monitors beeped in their steady mechanical rhythm. The blinds were drawn, a single fluorescent panel hummed above the bed, casting the kind of light that made everything look like evidence. She looked at the man in the bed. He was large. That was the first thing. Even diminished by injury and stillness, even with the IV lines and the nasal cannula and the bruising that spread across the left side of his face like a dark map, he took up the bed in a way that suggested the bed had been built for someone smaller. His hands rested on top of the blanket. They were scarred across the knuckles in patterns she did not recognize. His chart said John Mercer. His vitals said something was wrong, not with his body, but with the logic of his condition. She read the numbers twice. Heart rate 44. Respiratory rate 8. Both impossibly low for a man with his injuries, both impossibly steady. She checked the IV drip, changed the saline bag, recorded his blood pressure, which was low but stable in a way that felt intentional, like a house with all the lights turned down to conserve power during a storm. She was supposed to leave. Instead, she stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him the way she looked at Tomas when he was sleeping, and she was trying to figure out what he had been dreaming about, not with clinical distance, with curiosity. There was a small silver coin on the bedside table. She had almost missed it. It sat next to a sealed plastic bag containing what she assumed were his personal effects, but the coin was outside the bag, placed deliberately, heads up. It was worn smooth on one side. She did not touch it. She leaned closer to check the oxygen sensor clipped to his finger, and her hand brushed his wrist. His skin was warm, warmer than it should have been, and his pulse under her fingertips did something impossible. It quickened, just for a moment, just enough to register. Then it settled back to that deep, slow, deliberate rhythm, as if the body had caught itself doing something it wasn't supposed to do, and corrected the error. She pulled her hand back, looked at the monitor. The number read 44, same as before. Steady, unchanged, but she had felt it. She was sure of it. She stood there for a long time in that humming fluorescent light, looking at a man the military said was unconscious, and she thought about all the ways a person could be present in a room without anyone knowing. She did not mention it to Sandra. She did not write it in the chart. She came back the next day. The first time Ellie spoke to him, she did not mean to. She was adjusting the IV drip, checking the flow rate against the chart, when her hand brushed his wrist and she felt the pulse beneath the skin jump. Not the steady metronomic beat she had been monitoring for 3 shifts now. A stutter, a recognition. She pulled her hand back, looked at his face. Nothing had changed. The same closed eyes, the same jaw held in a line that even unconsciousness could not soften, the same absolute stillness that made him look less like a sleeping man and more like a man holding a door shut from the inside. But the monitor had caught it. A spike in heart rate, 4 beats above baseline, lasting exactly the duration of her touch. Then back to normal, as if nothing had happened, as if the body had corrected an error. She should have charted it and moved on. Instead, she said, "I know you're in there." The words came out quieter than she intended, almost swallowed by the hum of the ventilation system and the soft rhythmic compression of the pneumatic cuffs on his calves. She stood very still after she said it, the way you stand still after knocking on a door you are not sure you should have approached. Nothing happened. She finished her checks. She left the room. She did not chart the spike. That night, in the apartment she shared with Tomas, and a persistent leak in the kitchen ceiling, she sat on the edge of the bathtub after putting him to bed and thought about what Dr. Okafor had said during rounds. Deliberate. The word had lodged in her like a splinter she could not stop pressing. She had cared for comatose patients before. She knew what absence looked like in a body. The slack mouth, the hands that curled inward like leaves, the particular gravity that pulled at the features when no one was home behind them. Marcus Thorne did not look absent. He looked occupied. Every muscle in his face carried the faint tension of a man who was somewhere specific, doing something that required his full attention. She had seen that look before, though never on an unconscious patient. She had seen it on Tomas when he was building something complicated with his blocks, his whole body quiet except for the intensity behind his eyes. She went back the next morning. Charlene was still out. Sandra gave her the same assignment with even fewer words than before. This time, when she entered room 14, she talked. Not to him. Not exactly. She talked the way she talked when she was working, the low, steady narration she had developed in Albuquerque, where half her patients had been elderly and frightened and alone. She told him what she was doing as she did it. Checking the catheter, adjusting the bed angle 2 degrees to prevent pressure sores, replacing the saline bag. Her voice filled the room the way water fills a glass, not forcing anything out, just occupying the space that was empty. She was halfway through changing the dressing on the surgical site along his left side when his hand moved. Not much. Not even enough to call voluntary if you were being clinical about it. The fingers of his right hand extended and then curled, once, the way a man might test whether his hand still belonged to him. Ellie stopped talking. The room became very quiet. On the monitor, his brain activity shifted. The pattern Dr. Okafor had described as suppressed reorganized itself into something that looked, to Ellie's untrained eye, like someone turning up the lights in a building 1 floor at a time. She put down the gauze. She leaned closer. Not to his face, but to the space beside his ear, close enough that her breath would reach him, and she said the only thing she could think of that was true. "You don't have to come all the way back, but if you can hear me, you should know someone's here." The fingers curled again, held, released. She stayed until the end of her shift. She did not leave the room once. The first time his hand moved, Ellie almost missed it. She had been adjusting the IV drip, counting the seconds between drops the way she always did, when the silence in room 14 became too heavy to sit inside without doing something with her hands. Tomas was at school. The hallway was empty. The 2 men in civilian clothes had stepped away for a shift change, and for a span of perhaps 4 minutes, she was alone with Marcus Thorne in a way she had not been before. His left index finger twitched against the bedsheet. Not a spasm. She knew what spasms looked like. She had watched enough comatose patients cycle through involuntary movements to recognize the difference between a nervous system firing blind and a nervous system reaching for something. This was a second kind. His finger moved laterally, then stopped, then moved again. A deliberate pattern. 2 short movements, 1 long, 2 short. Ellie stood very still. She did not know Morse code. She did not know what the pattern meant, if it meant anything at all. But she knew what intention looked like in a body, because she had spent 3 years in Albuquerque watching patients try to communicate through the wreckage of strokes and intubation tubes and paralysis that stole everything except the desperate animal need to be understood. She put her hand next to his on the bed, not touching. Close enough that if he moved again, he would feel the warmth of her skin. His finger stopped. Then his whole hand shifted. A 1/4 inch. toward hers. She felt the hair rise on her forearms. Not fear. Something closer to the feeling she got when Tomas had spoken his first word, and she realized she was in the presence of someone becoming. Someone crossing a threshold that could not be uncrossed. "I'm here," she said quietly. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm here." Nothing. The monitors held their rhythm. The ventilator pushed its slow mechanical breath into the room and pulled it back. Then his hand moved again. The same pattern. 2 short, 1 long, 2 short. She pulled her phone from her pocket and typed the sequence into a search with one hand, keeping the other near his on the bed. The results loaded slowly on the hospital Wi-Fi, and when she read the answer, she sat down in the chair beside him and did not move for a long time. The letter was V. She did not know what F meant. She did not know if it was the beginning of a word or a fragment of a thought that had broken apart on its way out of whatever deep place he had buried himself inside. But it was language. It was a man choosing a letter and sending it through the only channel his body would permit. And that meant he was not gone. He was not sleeping. He was locked inside himself, and he was trying to get a message out through the thinnest crack in the wall. She looked at his face. The bruising had faded to the color of old tea stains. His jaw was still. His eyes moved beneath their lids in patterns she had started to recognize over the past week. Patterns that accelerated when she spoke and slowed when she was silent, as though her voice was a frequency he was tracking even from the bottom of wherever he had gone. She leaned closer. She could smell the antiseptic on his skin, and beneath it something else, something warm and human that the hospital had not managed to erase. "I'm going to learn the alphabet," she told him. "The whole thing. So next time you have something to say, I'll be ready." His hand was still. The monitors beeped. Outside, she heard the footsteps of the civilian men returning to their posts. She picked up her phone and opened a new browser tab. She began to memorize. The first time his heart rate changed in response to her voice, Ellie almost missed it. She had been adjusting the IV drip, talking the way she always talked now, which was to say without thinking about whether anyone was listening. She had been telling him about Tomas and the science fair project that had taken over their kitchen table, something involving baking soda volcanoes and a level of glitter that would outlast them both, and she had laughed at her own description of the eruption that had coated their ceiling fan. The monitor beeped differently, not an alarm, not a crisis, just a shift. His resting rate had been holding steady at 54 beats per minute for days, the kind of number that belonged to an elite athlete or a man whose body had been trained to operate like a machine even while unconscious. It climbed to 61 while she was mid-sentence, then settled back to 56 when she stopped to check the bag. She stared at the monitor, looked at him, looked back at the monitor. She kept talking. The number rose again, 60, 62. She stopped. It fell. Ellie set down the IV clamp and pulled the rolling stool closer to his bedside. She sat. She said his name, the real one, the one she was not supposed to know and had figured out in her second week, because she was not stupid, and because the civilian guards outside his door were not as careful with their phone conversations as they believed themselves to be. Admiral Thorne, 64. She felt something move through her chest that was not quite fear and not quite hope. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of a diagnosis that nobody else had made, knowing that what she did next would either matter enormously or not at all. She leaned closer, close enough to smell the antiseptic on his skin, and beneath it something faintly mineral, like riverstone. "I know you can hear me." The monitor held at 64. His face did not change. His hands remained exactly where they had been for weeks, resting on the white sheet with the fingers slightly curled. The way a man's hands look when he has decided to hold nothing. She reached for his chart and began writing. Not in the official section. In the margins of her own nursing notes, the ones she kept in a small spiral notebook she carried in her scrub pocket, because she had learned in Albuquerque that the things that mattered most about a patient were rarely the things that fit in the approved fields. She wrote the times, she wrote the numbers, she wrote what she had been saying when the numbers changed and what she had stopped saying when they fell. Over the next 3 shifts, she built a map. His heart rate responded to direct address. It responded to her voice specifically and not to the sound of Sandra checking the equipment or the phlebotomist drawing blood at 0600. It responded most when she spoke about things that were ordinary and human and had nothing to do with the military or medicine or the reason he was here. It responded when she laughed. It did not respond when she asked him clinical questions. It did not respond when she read his vitals aloud. It did not respond to the 2 men in civilian clothes who entered his room on Tuesday evening and stood over his bed for 11 minutes without speaking before leaving. It responded to Tomas, to the glitter, to the story about the neighbor's dog who had learned to open the gate latch, to the sound of her pulling the stool closer and sitting down as if she had nowhere else to be. She did not tell Dr. Okafor. Not yet. She did not tell Sandra. She told no one because she understood something about this place that 11 weeks had taught her quietly and completely. In this building, information about a man like Marcus Thorne did not flow toward the people who could help him. It flowed toward the people who controlled him, and Ellie Vasquez had not come all the way from Albuquerque to be a current in someone else's river. The monitors changed their song at 0 to 11 hours. Ellie was in the chair beside the bed, where she had taken to spending the last 40 minutes of her shifts, reading aloud from a battered copy of a Patrick O'Brian novel she'd found in the hospital's donation bin. She had been halfway through a passage about a ship rounding the Cape of Good Hope when the steady, metronomic rhythm of the heart monitor shifted. Not an alarm, not the staccato panic of a code, something more like a key change in a piece of music she had been listening to for weeks. She set the book down. His fingers moved first. The right hand, the one closest to her, opened and closed against the sheet with the slow deliberation of a man testing whether his body still belonged to him. Then the left. Then a breath that was different from every breath she had heard him take. Deeper, rougher, drawn with intention rather than reflex. Ellie stood. She did not press the call button. She would think about that later, about why her first instinct was not to summon Dr. Okafor or the neurology team or the 2 men who still stood outside the door in their permanent civilian clothes. Her first instinct was to be still and let him arrive. His eyes opened. They were grey. She had not known that. Weeks of reading his body, his vitals, the architecture of his silence, and she had never seen his eyes. They moved across the ceiling with the careful tracking of someone cataloguing a space for exits, threats, geometry. Then they found her. He did not speak. His jaw worked once, twice, the muscles remembering a function they had suspended. His tongue moved behind dry lips. Ellie reached for the cup of water she kept on the bedside table and held the straw to his mouth without asking. He drank. 3 small sips, controlled even now. "You're at Walter Reed," she said. Her voice was quiet and unhurried, the same voice she had been using to read to him, to talk to him about Tomas and the weather and the novel about ships. "You've been here for a while, you're safe." His eyes stayed on her face. She watched him process the word safe the way she imagined he processed intelligence briefings, not accepting it, but filing it for verification. Then he spoke. "How long?" Not a question. A demand made hoarse and small by weeks of disuse. 31 days. Something moved behind his eyes, a calculation she could not follow. His gaze went to the window, where the first grey suggestion of dawn was pressing against the glass. And then back to her, the others on the aircraft. Ellie did not know. She had never been told how many people were on the helicopter, or whether any of them had survived, or whether the helicopter had existed at all in any official record. She had learned enough about this place to understand that the absence of information was itself a kind of information. I don't know, she said. I can find out. He looked at her for a long time. She held the look. She had spent 31 days talking to this man without any expectation of response, learning the language of his body, earning nothing. She was not going to flinch now that he could see her doing it. You're the one who's been reading, he said. Yes. Patrick O'Brien. You could hear me. He did not confirm this. His right hand opened and closed once more against the sheet, and she understood that this was as much as he could give right now. The effort of surfacing was visible in the faint tremor along his forearms, the controlled rate of his breathing, the way he held his head perfectly still against the pillow, as though any movement might send him back under. She picked up the book and sat down. We were at the Cape of Good Hope, she said. He closed his eyes, but his hand, the right one, remained open on the sheet, palm up. And Ellie Vasquez, who had never been trained for any of this, understood exactly what that meant. She did not take it, not yet. She turned the page and kept reading. The silence in the room had changed. Ellie noticed it the moment she stepped through the door for her evening round. It was not the silence of absence, not the mechanical quiet of a body being kept alive by machines and stubbornness. It was the silence of someone listening. She set down the blood pressure cuff and looked at him. Marcus Thorne's eyes were open, not fluttering, not half-lidded, and searching the way patients looked when they surfaced from deep sedation. Open. Fixed on the ceiling with the particular focus of a man who had already assessed every corner of the room and decided the ceiling was the safest place to rest his gaze. Admiral, she said quietly. His jaw worked. The muscles in his throat moved like something mechanical, remembering its purpose. When the sound came, it was barely a sound at all, a dry rasp that carried the shape of a word without its weight. She poured water into the plastic cup on his bedside table and held the straw to his lips. He drank without looking at her, 3 slow pulls. Then he turned his head and his eyes found hers, and what she saw in them was not confusion. It was recognition. You talk to me, he said. His voice sounded like gravel dragged across slate. About your son. Ellie's hand tightened on the cup. She set it down carefully. I did. Thomas. He said the name with the accent correct, the way she said it, not the way most people at Walter Reed said it. He builds things. Yes. Something moved behind his eyes. Not warmth exactly, something closer to inventory. He was cataloguing what he knew, measuring it against where he was, constructing a map of the time he had lost. She had seen patients do this before. She had never seen one do it with this kind of precision. How long, he said. Not a question. A demand with the punctuation removed. 19 days since the crash. He closed his eyes. She watched his chest rise and fall, the rhythm changing as he absorbed the number. 19 days. She could not imagine what that calculation meant for a man whose life was measured in classified briefings and operations that did not officially exist. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. He did not blink it away. He did not turn his head. He let her see it, and she understood that this was not vulnerability. It was a decision. There was a village, he said, in the mountains, not Virginia, before. She did not speak. She pulled the chair closer and sat down. 14 people, women and children mostly. We had intelligence that the compound adjacent was holding weapons. The strike was approved at levels above my authority to question. His hand moved on the blanket, fingers spreading and then closing into a fist so slowly it looked like a time-lapse of something growing. I questioned it anyway. I delayed the strike by 9 hours, sent a team to verify. The monitor beside him beeped its steady rhythm. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. The team confirmed civilians. No weapons. I reported up the chain. The strike was cancelled. He paused. Officially. Ellie felt the temperature in the room drop by degrees that had nothing to do with the thermostat. 6 weeks later, the village was gone. Different operation, different authorization, no delay. His eyes found the ceiling again. I was told it was unrelated. I was told a lot of things. His breathing had changed. The monitors showed his heart rate climbing. Not dangerously, but enough. Enough that his body was remembering what his mind had decided to unlock. That's what I was running from, he said. Not the crash. The crash was just where my body finally agreed with what my mind already knew. He looked at her, that I couldn't carry it anymore. Not alone. She reached out and placed her hand over his fist on the blanket. His fingers did not open, but they did not pull away. You're not alone, she said. The monitor beeped. The corridor was quiet. His fist remained closed, but the pressure in it changed and she felt the difference against her palm like a word he could not yet say. The corridor was quiet at 600. Ellie walked it the way she had walked it every morning for 3 weeks now, her shoes making that particular sound against the linoleum that she had stopped noticing somewhere around week 2. The 2 men in civilian clothes were gone. They had been gone for 4 days. Nobody had replaced them, and nobody had explained why. And Ellie had learned enough about this place to understand that the absence of guards was its own kind of statement. She carried his chart in one hand. The name on it still said John Mercer. She pushed open the door to room 14 and found him sitting up. Not propped up by the adjustable bed. Not leaning against the pillows she had repositioned 100 times, memorizing the architecture of his breathing, sitting up, his own weight, his own spine, his hands flat on the mattress beside his hips, the way a man sits when he is deciding whether his body will hold him. His eyes were open. She had seen them before only in the photograph clipped inside his classified jacket, the one she was never supposed to have opened. In the photograph, they had been the eyes of a man who commanded rooms without entering them. Now they were something else. They were the eyes of a man who had come back from a very long way away and was not yet certain what he had come back to. He looked at her. She did not drop the chart. She did not call for Dr. Okafor. She did not press the button on the wall that would bring the rapid response team in 45 seconds. She stood in the doorway holding his chart with his fake name on it, and she looked back at him. And the room was so quiet she could hear the ventilation system breathing for both of them. You talk to me, he said. His voice was a ruin. 3 weeks of silence and intubation and whatever war he had been fighting inside his own skull had stripped it down to something barely above a whisper, dry and cracked and deliberate. Every word cost him something. Every shift, she said. I know. He lifted one hand from the mattress. It trembled. The effort of that single gesture was visible in his jaw, in the tendon that stood out along his neck, in the way his breathing changed. He turned his palm upward, not reaching for her, showing her something. The hand itself. The fact that it moved. The fact that he had chosen to move it. You told me about your son, he said. Thomas. You told me he builds things out of cardboard boxes. That he made you a castle once and it was too small to fit through the door of your apartment, so you sat inside it in the hallway and read to him. Ellie's throat closed. You told me that on the 4th night, he said. I was trying to go deeper, trying to shut down everything that hurt. And you told me that story and I thought about a boy building a castle out of cardboard, and I stayed where I was. I didn't go deeper. She set the chart down on the bedside table. The plastic clip made a small sound against the metal surface. You said something else, he continued. His hand was still raised, still trembling. You said that the bravest thing Tomas ever did was leave the door of the castle open, because he wanted someone to come in. She remembered saying it. She had not known anyone was listening. Marcus Thorne looked at her from the bed where he had held himself between living and dying for 21 days, and his ruined voice carried the weight of every classified operation, every impossible order, every door he had sealed shut inside himself to survive. I would like to leave the door open, he said. Ellie pulled the chair to his bedside. The same chair. The one with the uneven leg that rocked slightly when she sat down. She sat down. "Then leave it open," she said. Outside the window, the sun was coming up over Walter Reed. The light reached the foot of his bed first, then moved slowly across the white sheets, and neither of them looked away from the other to watch it arrive.